Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at IP Talents today, as we're lucky to have the esteemed Dr. James Weyhenmeyer to discuss the role of the Vice President of Research in research security. My name is Stefano Serafini, and I am Executive Vice President for International Business Development here at IP Talents. Today, I'm very happy to be your host for this discussion. It's a great honor for me to introduce to you Dr. James Weyhenmeyer, who is currently the Vice President of Research at the prestigious Auburn University. Dr. Weyhenmeyer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Well, we appreciate having you, and I can tell you from here at the IP Talents team, it's been a great privilege working with you and your staff. But I wanted to give our audience a brief introduction for those who are unfamiliar with your work, as well as the responsibilities of a Vice President for Research. To give our audience a little background, Dr. Weyhenmeyer first joined Auburn University in April 2019 and serves as the institution's Vice President for Research and Economic Development. In this role, he provides leadership to various research and economic development units. Prior to joining Auburn, he was the Vice President for Research and Economic Development at Georgia State University, as well as the Chair of the Research Foundation Board of Directors. Before joining Georgia State, he was the Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development at the State University of New York and the Vice President for Research at the State University of New York Research Foundation. Furthermore, Dr. Weyhenmeyer has a prolific research background in the areas of cardiovascular disease and stroke. So to say that he has the right pedigree to discuss research security and its impact on universities is an understatement, and we are truly grateful to have him here with us today. With that being said, let's get to our questions. So, Dr. Weyhenmeyer, the first question. With the emergence of new research security requirements and regulations, such as NSPM 33 and the CHIPS and Science Act, to name a few, in what way do you think the role for universities has changed when it comes to research security, and how have these new requirements and legislation impacted research programs?
So I guess where I would start is just suggesting that I would break out the pool of research institutions that are out there into three separate categories. Certainly at the top of the list, and those that are specifically relevant as it relates to this particular topic, are those institutions that have matured. They are at a level where they are already doing controlled unclassified and classified research. They have really established a very mature research security vertical, which is critically important, and something that I think is only coming into vogue. But there are a number of institutions out there that ultimately have already defined what that looks like. They put together their respective teams, and clearly they are in a position to really do significant research in the area of both unclassified as well, or controlled unclassified as well as classified work. A second group that I would suggest are those that are aspirational at the moment, institutions that are clearly moving in the direction of what I just described, and that is to, in essence, develop this mature environment that ultimately does have capacity to do both controlled unclassified as well as classified work. That group is very much in a build strategy as opposed to being in a fully built out opportunity or space at the moment. And the third group are those institutions that have not essentially started down this path yet, and yet are looking at this as an opportunity going forward. I think that is a problematic space at the moment, but maybe not one that does not have exceptions or opportunities that are connected to it. The reason that I would at least suggest that it becomes a bit more difficult for that group that have not started into that process, as these various new regulatory compliant mandates are now beginning to slowly evolve and to essentially come into, again, the public domain where they can be looked at more clearly. It is, I think we are now in a time zone where, where those that have already moved down this path to some extent have a bit of an advantage in terms of what this will look like going forward. So I do believe that kind of looking at institutions, all of them essentially could be very good research universities, but only a couple of subsets, at least in my mind, in essence, are targeting, if you will, what will be this ongoing opportunity in both controlled unclassified as well as classified work. And again, again, as just another data point, literally, if you look at those first two levels, both those that are very mature and those that are in a build process, what is happening in those areas is again something that is clearly beginning to redefine what the space will look like as it relates to not only what happens in the US, but happens across the globe. So I think there are a lot of things that are essentially tracking in this particular area that again would be very attractive to many institutions and indeed already are attractive to many institutions. As it relates to the types of things in the research space itself that are beginning to change as part of this, is really, I think, a redefinition, if you will, of what was initially very much related to basic and fundamental research. Those areas which now are being looked at very differently as something that could quickly evolve into something that is, again, under the umbrella of controlled unclassified. And in some cases even classified. In other words, as multiple projects come together, research projects come together, they can transition from being something that was very fundamental, was very basic, to now something that actually does meet the standard of, in essence, being something that has a security envelope necessarily wrapped around it. So I think we are looking at now a very different path forward as it relates to what research programs, again, will look like going as we do move down this path. And I, quite honestly, for those that are in that domain where they are either already doing controlled unclassified and classified work, or are moving into that space in a much more significant way, there will be an expectation to essentially tightly align with the NIST standards, 800-171 and 853 being the two that are typically being talked about as it relates to the areas, again, that are already in progress to essentially again to be able to do research projects in this space. I think the other thing that certainly comes to mind as I think about where there are, again, potential issues and challenges, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but clearly one of the other things that I think is going to be problematic, and actually with all three of those levels that I mentioned a few moments ago, there will be the expectation that unfunded mandates that are necessary for infrastructure, that are necessary for a variety of different elements that are part of essentially working in the QE as well as a classified space, that institutions will have the capacity on board to essentially offset the cost of doing that with indirect cost recovery that is those funds that are coming into a university. That becomes, again, even more challenging as it relates to an institution that is not yet started down this particular path. So for those that have had experience with 800-171, with 853, that puts them in a great opportunity moving forward. So hopefully that helps a bit with the question that you asked.
Very much so, and I have a couple of follow-up questions. I'll leave one of them for the following question I have, which is a two-parter, but it touches on something you just mentioned. But excuse me, but the breaking up into three subsets, three levels was very interesting part of your answer, and I'm curious. The last subset, the part that is not even aspirational, that they're not yet moving in that direction, but they see it as an opportunity. Would you be willing to hazard a guess as to what percentage or what fraction of the institutions out there that group is comprised of or makes up?
I think it could be a very significant number that have not essentially even started to move down this path. So it is, first of all, there is a significant expense related to, in essence, putting this kind of framework in place. So whether you are already doing controlled unclassified and classified, or you are moving into that space, already have some experience, may not be to the extent of complete maturity, but those institutions have already invested an enormous amount of capital to essentially get to where they are today. I think for those institutions which are not at that level, the assumption would be, and it is just an assumption, that putting together again the funding, the capital needs to essentially come up to that next level, I think would be challenging. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. It means that it would certainly be a challenging process to get there, and particularly with, again, new mandates, new regulatory mandates or regulatory situations that are now will be forthcoming in the next several months to the next year. So, so yes, I think there will be. I think there are some existing challenges that would certainly exist for that third group. I would also suggest, and while it's not necessarily something that you would see in a survey like the NSF Herd survey, but there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 colleges and universities across the U.S. Many of them certainly have some piece of research going on, not all of them, but some piece of research that is actually happening on that campus. Those majority of those, the very large majority of those, or would in essence be in this third category, where they're doing some research, but literally not at the level that would ultimately translate into what could be a much more substantial, but also much more costly, position, if you will, in terms of doing, again, controlled unclassified as well as classified work.
Interesting. Oh, well, thank you for that. Very informative. All right, well, let's get to the next question. And again, this is a two-parter, and it's going to touch on some of the things you mentioned. As a vice president of research, you, I would imagine, have to often look at external factors that can impact your research program and its internal operations. So the first part of the question, Dr. Weyhenmeyer, is how do you see the threat landscape evolving for universities and their research programs?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I think I think most individuals would essentially suggest that the most significant threat or the largest concern that we might have as it relates to a threat situation is an internal threat as opposed to an external threat. There are a lot of again, opportunities where external cyber-related threats, other things are coming into an institution. But at the end of the day, it certainly appears that where you see the most significant impact, if you will, as it relates to our threat impact, is again with individuals that are on a campus and essentially are using that opportunity to either send information out to other areas around the world, or again disrupting at some level as it relates to what's going on in again this very sensitive space. From my perspective, we have opened up the doors for undergraduate and graduate students, for postdocs, postdoctoral fellows, for research faculty, for a lot of individuals that essentially have migrated into the US and onto university campuses. There are at least some number of those that ultimately, again, do present a threat situation as they move on to a particular campus, and they do so with a very specific direction that they are, or focus on the types of things that they have been asked to look at or look for, and to essentially return that information to an offshore country. So I think where the risk profile is highest is not necessarily coming in from an external source, but rather on home base, on the campus itself going forward. And I think one of the things that is challenging for research institutions, research universities that are working in this space, is to really define what that looks like. So as people are coming onto the campus, how are they essentially being, in essence, assessed as it relates to their risk profile for a particular area. So if we're doing work in the aerospace area that ultimately is highly sensitive, highly significant as it relates to what DoD and other agencies are looking for, having an individual that is coming onto the campus who is specifically targeting that space is what one of the things that I think universities, research institutions now need to begin, and have been essentially looking at how to make those assessments that ultimately do give some some idea of what that risk profile might look like going forward. I think that's going to be a critical issue. We see that here at my institution. We have a number of individuals that indeed have for years been on the campus that ultimately, could certainly have some threads that are going back to other countries, again, around the world. And quite honestly, we're trying to define or to establish ways to essentially reduce that risk as much as possible. So I think it is, rather than an external influence, the external influence could be a country that is essentially telling the individual sitting on a campus, and they are the internal threat that ultimately is responding to that other country. And so from that perspective, it does have an external piece to it, but I think the mechanics around really the threat situation are largely related to what is, an individual that is resident on the campus itself.
Okay, and I would imagine that, that internal threat factor can cover a large spectrum. It can cover, something as malicious, if you will, as someone who has interests diametrically opposed to the institution that they're working for, to, as we've seen in a lot of cases, and if not most of the cases, in the area of research where collaboration is encouraged and sharing of information is necessary for collaboration, as well as there may be some confusion regarding previous guidance. A lot of things can get lost, and some people can fall outside the lines. even if it's not their intent to do something untoward. But that just highlights what you're saying is, if I may, that the risk, the greater scope of the risk falls on the internal side, but by the external side, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Okay. And then you touched on a little bit of this in your answer there, but the second part of the question is, what tips and recommendations for those who are tasked with preparing to protect their programs from these risks? What tips and recommendations would you provide them?
So I do think it truly is about, doing your due diligence and trying to understand, as much as you possibly can, what those, again, risk profiles, those risk situations actually do look like. So from, again, never enough due diligence. I think that's always something that we need to be incredibly vigilant in terms of making sure that we are doing that as best as we possibly can. And there's a lot of technology that goes into doing exactly that. So ability to have software platforms and other types of assessment tools that ultimately will provide, again, more and more information about individuals that might be there for the wrong reason, might be at the institution and on the campus for the wrong reason. I also think that it is never too early to begin identifying and engaging the private sector companies who are involved in this space to help with assessment and potential certification, which is another piece of this going forward. But I think that reach out to, in essence, using those companies that have now developed, in essence, a very important, I think, process and methodology that can be used by universities, by campuses going forward. We, at least on my particular campus, we are constantly trying to stay ahead of the threat landscape, at the bleeding edge of the threat landscape. It is again, I think, a very challenging thing that requires an awful big toolbox to get everything done at the end of the day. But I think it is something that again, not just with what's going on inside the university, but accessing others on the outside, particularly from the private sector, is something that has enormous value for trying to make sure that at the end of the day that you are compliant, that you are essentially doing things at a level that ultimately does meet all of the regulatory mandates that are out there.
Okay, really good. And touching on your point about really focusing on the assessment and never enough due diligence. It's important to have the tools and the big toolbox, as you mentioned. It's also important, I think, we've seen, to have the skill sets and the expertise to provide a kind of so what analysis once you identify the risks in your program or potential risks, because that too can require a lot of manpower, brain power, and it's important to have the necessary skill sets and expertise in order to be efficient in that space when you're doing the assessment, whether it's internal or whether you're reaching out to the professional private sector.
And the drill down is significant. I mean, this is not at a superficial level. It needs to go to the core. In terms of being able to really identify or begin to address, what is a potential situation that is happening on a campus. So again, I think tools are a very, very critical piece. Whether it's AI, whether it is other types of tools that we're using to essentially, try to define what this looks like. All of that, I think, is critically important and actually does help in a very, very significant way to identify where there is at least the potential for an internal threat to to take place. So it's important that, folks are essentially looking at that as, again, something that is going to be a very effective tool as it relates to really understanding whether you have something that has the potential for a flare-up, and even in a more significant way may essentially release a secret that is part of what has come out of a research program that may be, connected to defense strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
All kinds of things that could happen around that.
Absolutely. Good point. Good point. Well, our next question is also a two-parter, and I'll ask both of these at the same time because they kind of blend together quickly, as you'll see. And basically, it's to ask you to put on your prognosticator hat. Looking into the future, Dr. Weyhenmeyer, what challenges do you expect to emerge for universities and their staff in this environment? And the second part is there a particular challenge that keeps you up at night in your position?
Good questions, very good questions. So I would at least start by saying the pace of regulatory change right now is stunning. We are seeing a lot of things that ultimately are just beginning to hit the Federal Register, just beginning to essentially be released for comment, a variety of different things that are out there. There are also enormous expectations. One only needs to look at CHIPS and Science Act to get some feeling for just how critical, how important this is to this country. So there are a lot of things that are essentially happening. I don't think this ends anytime soon. This essentially continuing to refine the regulatory environment in a way that ultimately will give us the best protection at the end of the day that we can possibly, and we can dream about it now, but it may be something in the future in terms of what that does look like. I do think that, with the advent of NSPM 33, that should be published in the August-September timeframe of this year. The comment period on that particular set of regulations, again, has been, I think, fully. If it has not closed yet, it will be closing at the end of the week. So but again, it's one that has some pretty hefty, pretty significant, again, boundaries or guardrails that are provided as part of that. I think we're going to see a lot more that comes out of what OSTP put together in the very beginning. And again, something that will continue to be refined and having more and more impact at the end of the day as it relates to trying to make sure that we are not getting out of bounds as it does relate to again, sensitive technology that's being developed. I also think, which we did not mention earlier, but CMMC 2.0, which is now at least, the thought is that will be somewhere in our toolbox, but that particular set of regulations, which again have with them whether it's controls or standards, but again, a variety of different things that ultimately do begin to define in a very substantial way, but define what those compliance or those areas need to look like going forward. And similar to what I said a few moments ago about insider threat, I think that's another area that continues to be a very ripe opportunity for individuals in other countries who are looking to essentially capitalize on the research that has gone in the US. It is something that ultimately I think we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to, and something that will not go away. And there are too many ways to essentially, at least at the moment, to essentially move around those barriers to in essence gain access. And again, without anybody really determining in that process that you had somebody that was essentially up to malfeasance, up to essentially creating a situation that again is very problematic. I think the other space that and when I think about staying up at night, there are a couple of things. Certainly the insider threat issue is something that I worry about all the time, because at any moment the FBI could be on a campus essentially having a very significant conversation about an individual, and an individual that for whatever reason has been suspected to be somebody who is in essence connected back to a foreign institution, which is problematic.
Yeah, that rarely ends well when that happens.
That's exactly right. But the other thing that is from my perspective troubling, and something that I think will continue to be problematic as we move forward, is just the cost of all of this. At the end of the day, we're talking about a very, very large amount of money that ultimately will be invested in this space. It is, and it is important that happens because of the potential economic income, the economic impact moving forward for the U.S. But I think there will be a very, very significant investment that is made. I think that, again, as I said at the very beginning, becomes a challenging issue for a lot of institutions, being able to essentially set aside those dollars, those funds that will essentially support this. And oh, by the way, you're building in these research verticals, you're building a team, not a single individual, but a team of individuals that ultimately need to be part of that process. And the more scaling that you do in those research spaces, the larger that team needs to be to essentially make sure that we are again vigilant. We are again doing the kinds of things that need to be done to in essence make sure that we're not being compromised at some level. So the two things that I would put at the top of my list are internal threat, and the other is budget. And both of them I have to worry about all the time. That's why I don't sleep at night.
I was going to say, you probably don't get much sleep with all these thoughts on your mind. Well, really, really interesting, profound, and sobering answers. Thank you for that. Well, Dr. Weyhenmeyer, as we're nearing the end of our time, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. If you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with regarding research security.
So I'll be very quick. I think we are clearly in the midst of what is a rapidly changing environment that yet is to be fully defined. Exactly what this will look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think it's really hard to predict. I think a lot will depend on how quickly we can accelerate the work that is being done here. And that is not just the work that ultimately is related to, again, defense strategies, whatever it might be, but also how we protect, again, the intellectual property that's being developed in this country. And I think, again, for so many reasons, that is an area that I think everyone needs to be sensitive to as it relates to making sure that America is essentially, doing what it should do, which is being very innovative, but at the same time not being compromised by individuals that again are purely in it for malfeasance. I think the other thing that I would say and do so very quickly is that I would certainly encourage institutions that really feel that they can do something significant in this space to do exactly that. It's not necessarily easy, but certainly there is a different path that one can go on that will not have the regulatory environment that essentially exists in this space. But I do think that we need research universities that are very good at what they do and are very good at essentially identifying when there is a threat. And I think those types of things are going to be critically important for a long time into the future. So I think there's an awful lot yet to be done, but I also think that we've come a long way in terms of what we do see as really the opportunity around this space.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, again, Dr. Weyhenmeyer, thank you for your comments and your time today. I'm sure the audience, like myself, found this to be incredibly informative and insightful. For our audience, if you have any questions for us or for Dr. Weyhenmeyer, please feel free to email us at info@iptalons.com. And of course, stay tuned for more of our upcoming webinars. Again, Dr. Weyhenmeyer, thank you very much taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, take care.